to Christ the Center, your weekly conversation of Reformed theology. This is episode number 742 by my count. My name is Camden Busey. I'm in Grayslake, Illinois, as usual, but not for long. We're going to be moving to Libertyville. We want some more liberty in our lives, so we're going to be moving to Libertyville, the new place. But for the next several episodes, we'll still be here, Lord willing, and thankful for that. But also looking forward to a new chapter in our lives here at Reformed Forum. But I got a really fun episode lined up today. I just got back from the Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary Conference held in Greenville, South Carolina at Woodruff Road, PCA, on none other than Woodruff Road. And we had a wonderful time, and we've got a wonderful panel to talk about some of those things and talk about some other issues and matters going on in NAPARC, particularly in the PCA. A church that's near and dear to the hearts, and a lot of our listeners are members of the PCA. We have with us, first, I'll introduce one of our regulars, Jim Cassidy, who serves as pastor of South Austin OPC in South Austin, Texas. Just let us know that it is South by Southwest time. Your favorite time of year, Jim. How are you holding up?
Yeah, so I stay inside and I avoid the downtown area as much as I can during South by Southwest, and so far, so good.
I mean, is it like automatically triple the price of everything when this comes into town? Like all the food, you can't get a seat anywhere. What does Terry Black's look like when South by Southwest rolls in? I
wouldn't know. I don't go near it. I don't go near it, and it's hard to tell if the prices have tripled or it's just inflation. I don't know.
Yeah. We'll leave that to the pundits to decide, and they can blame whomever they'd like on whichever day they'd like to blame them. We have with us also for the very first time on this program, although he will be no stranger to many of you, and if he is a stranger to you, I hope he doesn't remain one. But I'd like to introduce and welcome to the program Brad Isbell. Brad, of course, is one half of the duo over at fine podcast Presbycast. Chortles Weekly, along with Presbyterian, and he also serves as a ruling elder at Covenant PCA in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. Many of you may know Nick Wilborn. He's one of the pastors there, along with John Blevins. And we've had Nick on the program before, but this is the first time to speak with Brad on a recording published by Reformed Forum. Welcome, Brad. It's good to see you.
Well, it's good to be with you, and when I run into you at a place like the conference, it's always good to hang out with you and all the Reform Forum guys.
Well, thank you,
Ryan and Rob and Bob Tarullo, all those guys. Really appreciate them.
Yeah, we had a great time at the conference, and you were there, had a table for more in the PCA, which we'll speak about today. We're going to be talking about all sorts of things, Presbyterian polity, General Assembly, but especially ruling elders and as commissioners at GA, how that all works. What are the principles behind it and why it's important that elders would participate in General Assembly. But just overall, the Greenville conference was really fun. It always is. I've been down there now 4 times in a row, 3 conferences. The other time I was down there for these Jerry Crick lectures in apologetics. But it's one of my favorite places to go. It's a highlight of my year to go visit the brothers down there. And I've seen you down there now twice. And we've had some good times. But you also did a few recordings, didn't you? You talked with Todd Pruitt, and who else did you get on the program?
Just to Todd this time, on the eve of his, the article at Reformation 21 that everyone should check out. Mm-hmm. It's made a few waves. Todd he usually regrets it after he talks with me, because I bring out the Machen warrior child in him, but he can't say no. He returns like a moth to a flame.
Yeah, or Stockholm syndrome. I could come up with all sorts of other analogies that he likes getting the abuse, I suppose, that you dole out to him. But he also receives quite a bit of it from Carl Truman. Carl was there speaking, delivered 2 lectures at the conference, and also I think he spoke at the main banquet at the end. I wasn't able to go to the banquet, but Carl's lectures were excellent. I encourage you to take a look at them if you haven't seen them already. But Todd gets beat down a bit.
Half of the first lecture was just Todd. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Carl excoriating Todd for his wardrobe.
I know. And I listened to their interview on Mortification to Spin this morning with Mark Jones, and he was getting even more abuse. So it's just part of the shtick that they have. We did talk to Todd. We hope to have him on the program in the future. We were hoping he could join us today. Pastoral life is a high priority and a high calling, and he wasn't able to make it. But we look forward to speaking with him. But Brad, if you could, why don't you explain why this article that Todd wrote? So we're going to have Brad on to talk about Todd's article. But he wrote over at Ref 21, which is a publication, an online magazine of the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, friends of ours. And Todd was speaking about latitude within the PCA, the concept of it, but also speaking about ruling elders at General Assembly, because there's been a charge by some that aren't happy with particularly how things went at the last General Assembly, that there are people within the PCA who would encourage more and more and more ruling elders to come. They see that as somehow stacking the deck against, the inevitable flow and progress of the PCA. So what's going on? I mean, explain this to us OP Luddites and weirdos in the corner.
Well, the context, it was sort of like in politics, the crazy factor was Trump for the past 5 years, and it still is. In the PCA, it's something called Revoice, which most of your listeners have heard about.
Yeah.
That would be a conference in 2018 that really introduced the concept of Side B, celibate gay Christianity to most people. And of course, we have a minister in the PCA who would describe himself in that way. So as you might imagine, that caused some controversy and numerous investigations. And so that has really increased polarization in the PCA, I think. And but there's something else. Apparently, from 2013 until last summer, there was a group which many of us had heard of, and there were sort of inklings of this. The occasional, semi-public email that described it, but something called the National Partnership in the PCA. And someone who was a member, obviously, sort of did we call it Presby Leaks. They put out about 8 or 9 years worth of emails that were traded in this group of people who we'd probably call progressives. Now, when I use the word progressive, that can be tough because it has a secular political connotation. That's not what it means, although there could be some overlap. But Brian Chappell, who is now our stated clerk, he wrote an article a few years ago, and he was talking about, let's describe the PCA. I know the OPC likes to talk about itself and makes a lot of its history. So you're always trying to understand yourselves, and we seem to do the same in the PCA. So one of the categories that Chappell used in this article, I just want to say
you've got a Machen picture behind you. Everyone knows. Just so we'll see the flow here of influence.
Oh, I love the OPC, man.
I'll take it. I'll dish it out. So we're cool.
I love to make fun of the OPC too, but that's
it's an easy thing to do.
Yeah. So as Chappell was writing this article describing the factions in the PCA, one of them he called progressives. Now, some people describe that way don't like it, but we consider it sort of a fair term because it was, sort of given to one faction by an authority, which is, Brian Chappell. You might also call them missionalists because the whole missional theology and type of outreach that's really a hallmark of that group. So this missional or progressive group, there was a smaller group of them, and they had sort of what turned out to be a secret political organization that they were running. And we had heard things about Facebook Messenger apps that told people when to vote and how to vote. And they did a lot of organizing to control committees and the Standing Judicial Commission and things like that. And it sort of all came out in the open late in the summer or in the fall of 2021, I believe it was. So that too amped up the drama level and really the suspicion and all that sort of thing. So I work with a group called More in the PCA. It's been around a few years. It's a public group. It's got a website, moreinthepca.org. We raise money, and we use it to help ruling elders get to General Assembly. And, I think last year was our biggest year. We helped about 50, somewhere around in there. There were 2,100 elders at last year's General Assembly, and still the proportion of ruling elders barely made it to 25%. So there have been, I think the charges of court stacking and of something nefarious with ruling elders is just sort of a deflection from what we really did see revealed about this national partnership organization, which was almost all pastors, and they were definitely involved. I can tell you, I've been around for a while, and the confessionalists or the conservatives or whatever you want to call them in the PCA, we've never been terribly organized. Like I tell people, if there was a secret email list of that sort of elder, I'd be on it, but there isn't, and I'm not.
Well, so there's a handful of things to pick up on, and Jim, please jump in whenever you'd like. But people might have heard of these different groups, and some people inside or outside the PCA might have different opinions about such groups existing. We'll come back to this a little bit later, but just for historical context, this is my new gig here. And to tie in with your Justice for Machen thing, J. Gresham Machen was involved in a lot of stuff, obviously in the 20s and 30s. But in 1935, he wrote an article in the Presbyterian Guardian titled "The Purpose of the Covenant Union," and I'll post a link to that in the episode description. But there was an organization prior to the existence of the OPC, or the first PCA, the PC of A. The OPC was sued, obviously, for taking that name, and the PCUSA, through legal means, forced them to adopt a new name, which ended up being the OPC. But Machen established, with others, a group within the PCUSA to try to maintain orthodoxy and maintain its purpose and mission. But what ended up happening is, once it was determined that reformation from within the church was not going to happen, certainly the boards of the church were not going to be altered and swayed, that organization, the Presbyterian Constitutional Covenant Union, ended up, I don't want to overinterpret this, but it ended up becoming the proto-OPC. It wasn't a shadow church in that sense. It wasn't like a sleeper cell within. Some people might have thought of it that way, but it was an affinity group within the PCUSA, which eventually many of the people involved in that went off to form the OPC, what would become the OPC. Let me read to you just the four main principles here, and we'll come back connecting this to the modern day, hopefully to add some more context to groups like More in the PCA, the National Partnership, and the Gospel Reformation Network, and how those are similar or different from what was going on in 1935. Machen writes, "The Constitution of the Presbyterian Constitutional Covenant Union contains three principal articles in which the purpose and character of the union is set forth. These are Articles 2, 3, and 4. Article 2 sets forth the occasion for the forming of the union. The occasion is the increasing dominance of modernism in the Presbyterian Church in the USA. Article 3 sets forth the purpose of the union. The purpose is to maintain the constitution of the Presbyterian Church in the USA against the assaults of modernism. Article 4 contains the pledge or covenant to be subscribed to by those who are members of the union. The pledge obligates the members of the union to maintain a true Presbyterian church, either by reform of the Presbyterian Church in the USA or, failing that, by continuing the true succession of that church separately from the existing modernist indifferentist organization." Not every fundamentalist was on board with that. We should say it caused a rift, even at Westminster Seminary, where the board members were favorable, obviously, towards a seminary existing distinct from the official seminary at Princeton, which had become modernist influenced. But not everyone was supportive of beginning a new church. They didn't think it was time yet, at least. And so that led to eventually a showdown between the faculty and the board at Westminster. The faculty said, look, if you're not on board with this, we're all going to resign. And so the board resigned. And that led to, among other things, the formation of the Presbyterian Guardian. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Hopefully, the conversation we can have maybe with Daryl Hart and also with Dominic Aquila. But to bring things back to the present day, Brad, it's interesting because I imagine most people, I did not know much about the PCCU until just maybe a year ago. I stumbled upon it doing some work reading through the Guardian. But this isn't, these organizations are nothing new. But tell us a bit about the different approaches, because we can go all the way from a sleeper cell or even a caucus, for example, where there might be a private organization and the leadership of that organization tells the members or whips the members into voting a certain way at General Assembly, versus all the way on the other end might just be something as lightweight as, a group of people that get together for dinner and just encourage one another. So obviously, both of these three organizations I've mentioned are, somewhere in between them, or maybe not even on the spectrum. But how would you see that? I mean, what are your thoughts on that and connecting things back to Machen and the necessity of the PCCU at the time?
Well, I would hasten to point out that the situation of what we would call confessionalist or conservatives or traditionalists. We're not dealing
with modernism, so-called.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. The old. So our situation is not analogous to Machen's, nor is it analogous to the old Southern Church, the PCUS, from which the PCA came.
Correct.
Founded in 1973.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some interesting parallels between moves made in the Northern Church in the 20s and 30s, and then things that were happening, a decade later or two in the Southern Church. There's a lot of crying about, there's this website or that blog or this podcast or another.
Yeah, now we're one of them.
Right. And
talking to you.
Yes. But there was a journal called the Presbyterian Journal founded in 1942 to fight modernism and declension in the Southern Church. G. Aiken Taylor was the founder. That's a name some people will have heard. Mm. There was an organization of laymen, mostly ruling elders, I gather, formed in 1964 in the Southern Church. And it was instrumental to the founding of the PCA, but they first were trying to reform the PCUS, the old Southern Church. And there was a group of ministers, the Presbyterian Churchmen United, that formed in 1967. And there was also a group called Presbyterian Evangelistic Fellowship that was formed in the late 50s. And, it was over the concern that, there was no evangelism or it's sort of analogous to the Independent Board for Foreign Missions, that Machen founded. Mm-hmm. So those four groups were a big part in like the really early 70s of the basis for the new denomination. So laymen were involved, pastors were involved, media, and then, just a parachurch organization like an evangelistic outreach group. So those things were all done in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and they were in for a long fight. And it proved to be unsuccessful when they felt it necessitated the formation of the PCA in 1973. But I always repeat, there are no theological liberals in the PCA. Yeah. And I can say that because I know I'm well acquainted with Machen and what he faced, and this is not the same thing. But there have been guys who have tried to say that what we are up against in the PCA is analogous in some ways. There's no denial of supernatural Christianity or the inerrancy of Scripture, but there is there are two ways at least of looking at the mission of the church, and the big deal. I mean, Todd described it in his article as latitude. And of course, that goes along with what's called good faith subscription. That came in around 2002, which kind of formalized how we handle exceptions to the standards. But latitude, there's a broader and a narrower emphasis, depending on which side you're on. but also contextualization. I wrote about that recently. And in other words, it's how you do outreach and how you shape the church for a given context to try to reach a certain part of the culture or a certain kind of person. And that's sort of over against what we often call, and you'll hear the GRN use this phrase, ordinary means of grace ministry, which is focused primarily on the Lord's Day and on the proclamation of the Word, the teaching of it, and the sacraments. Yeah. So that's sort of the divide. It's somewhat between city and country. Or you might view it as being between kind of a blue suburbs and red suburbs. The PCA was diverse at its founding. We all recognize that. There were old school Presbyterians. There were conservative evangelicals. There were truly people who didn't like segregation and had some racial issues, and that's one of the reasons they wanted out. There were some people that were disturbed by things in the culture like the sexual revolution and the Vietnam War and the reactions to those things. So all those things were factors. There were probably 5 or 6 definable factions that formed the PCA, but we have exactly the same doctrinal standards as the OPC, for instance, and we have what is probably an old school book of church order. So whatever we were when we were founded, our bones are old school Presbyterian, spirituality of the church, ordinary means of grace. But we never have all agreed that that's the way to go. Yeah. And we certainly have a variety of practice and expression today.
Yeah. And you guys need to get your directory for public worship in there as a constitutional document. So I'm advocating, I'm stumping for that right now. So I'll take the heat for you, but
that's not going to happen. This is something, what we're just talking about the PCA here. When our members travel across the country, a lot of them have learned that just looking up the nearest PCA church and wherever they may be traveling can lead to some very interesting experiences.
Oh yeah,
because we have such a range of worship and types of churches. It's always been my feeling that in some of the other denominations, conservative reformed denominations, especially the OPC, there's a lot more uniformity in worship and the type of sermon you might hear, what you might see up front at the church, and so diversity is good in some ways, but I sometimes think that there can be too much, and that worship has to be one of the things that binds us together. And if there's such a variety of worship, you may have de facto variety of communions.
Jim, now you know me, and we've talked a lot about this, but I firmly believe that there are genetic DNA and dispositional differences between the OPC and the PCA. For example, I've written about this on our website. I generally see things, I think, the same way that Sean Michael Lucas sees them. He wrote the history of the PCA, and I know he's one voice among many. He's a really significant voice speaking historically for the PCA. I think largely we see the differences there the same way. We just have different convictions in response to those differences. But I love the PCA. I'd be in the PCA if the OPC didn't exist, but this is just, this is my mother, the OP. But that being said, even though there are, I think, some real distinctions, let's use some philosophical language, a lot of what the differences that we see on the surface, I'm more convinced that a lot of them are just functions of size too. I mean, if we all of a sudden multiplied the OPC by 10, we just couldn't do things the same way that we do them with a commissioned, or what we call a delegated assembly, but we like to call we don't have delegates, we have commissioners. Some people make a distinction between what those are. There's just certain things that wouldn't work. And over time, those dynamics, organizational dynamics, which become necessary, end up creating their own cultural climate. So I don't fault, a church that's 10 times larger than our tiny denomination for things such as a General Assembly the way it is, and doing a lot of things in committee, or even having a judicial commission, as much as that kind of just rubs me the wrong way. You can't necessarily have a trial. For example, if hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents and 2,000 people sitting there trying to hash it all out together, it's just not possible. You can add other things like synods and try to work things out. But Jim, what do you think about this? You've been around the block. You've worshiped in different churches and no doubt have your own thoughts on these matters. What do you have to say?
Well, observationally, I came into the Reformed world through a PCA congregation up in New Hampshire, so I'm very grateful for them. I would say that congregation, I'd have a hard time, at least on the surface, discerning the difference between them and your typical OP church.
Sure.
So it depends on where you find yourself as to how it's going to look in your experience among the body of Christ locally. So it really depends. I do think that our history, the differences between our two histories is significant here.
Yes.
I mean, on the one hand, my understanding, could be wrong, is that when the PCA was founded, many of the congregations that wanted to leave the Southern Presbyterian Church were able to leave with their buildings. The OPC did not have such a luxury, except for, I think, maybe one. They were not able to leave with their buildings and properties. And I think that right away, that gives sort of a different color to the two denominations. The one as sort of marginalized pilgrims, strangers on the earth, no home here on earth to call their own. And then the other sort of an identity of maintaining mainstreamism, right? There's still a sense we are still in the mainstream. We've broken off of the mainstream mainline denomination, but we're still we got our old building, our footprint here in the community going back hundreds of years or whatever. And so there was still mainstream identification for those early founders of the PCA. That wasn't the case for the OPC, and I think that has a significant place. But this is my question for Brad. Changing direction some, maybe back to the direction where we started, because I find this very, very interesting, and it goes back to the more in the PCA website. I'm fascinated by this difference between ruling elder and teaching elder dynamic within the PCA. I think we have a version of that within our own denomination here in the OPC. But Brad, what is the significance? Excuse me, got a frog in my throat here. What is the significance of the representation of ruling elders in the PCA, and why is it that more in the PCA feels so compelled to try to up that representation?
Well, I think it's an issue of fairness at one level, because, we've done it to ourselves in the PCA. We don't have a head tax as the OPC does to fund General Assembly, but you all have that.
It's an asking. You don't have to pay it, but yes.
And this grassroots, Southern denomination didn't want to pay no tax. Now, most of us did go with our buildings, but we had to pay something for them.
Sure.
I think the legal climate in the South and probably some minor differences in our documents made it easier for PCA churches to keep their buildings. But, we are grassroots. Which means it takes about a week for a congregation to leave the PCA. The Presbytery has no claim over our property the way the old Southern Church and PCUSA had claim over the Northern Church and the Southern Church's properties before they split off. But because we don't have to give money and we don't have to pay a certain amount per head or per year, the General Assembly is very expensive to attend. Now, most ministers get paid to attend. And, they don't have to use a week of vacation. All their expenses are paid. Not so for ruling elders. The other fairness issue is that you all have a delegated assembly in the OPC, and you're limited to a certain number of people from each presbytery.
Correct.
And you have a fixed size, fixed expenses. It may be, humble accommodation in a Christian college, or I know some people even camp in a nearby campground. Probably not going to happen in the PCA. But we're an all-comers assembly in the sense that of course, you all are 3 office. We are, 2 office, which means we have deacons and elders and 2 kinds of elders, ruling and teaching. If you're an ordained teaching elder or a pastor or a minister in the PCA, you have the right to attend and vote at Presbytery and at General Assembly. There's no limit. If you've ever been ordained and you're still a member of Presbytery, you can attend. And very often, your expenses are paid by whoever is sending you. It's just not the same with ruling elders. And ruling elders are limited to 2 per church, unless the church is above a certain size, and then I think it's above 350. You get another ruling elder for every 500 members or something like that. But as you can imagine, that doesn't affect many churches.
Sure.
So if every church sent every ruling elder they could send, and every teaching elder showed up, well, you'd have about 8,000 people there, but you would always have more teaching elders than ruling elders, the way it's structured.
Really? Even if everyone went?
Yes.
You would have more teaching elders.
Yeah, I've done the math on it. It might be close, but we don't have that many really large churches. So we have like 3,600 churches, and we have 5,000. We have 1,600 churches and 5,000 ministers.
What?
Yes. No, I knew you'd like that one. So yeah, it's just a different thing. It's a whole different dynamic. Now, we make much of the parity between ruling elders and teaching elders, and we've enshrined it well. The Standing Judicial Commission has 24 members, half are ruling elders, half are teaching elders. The Overtures Committee, which is our most powerful committee at General Assembly, obviously can have 2 commissioners per presbytery. We have 88 presbyteries, so you could have about 180. Yeah, 180 members, and half could be ruling elders, half are teaching elders. No surprise that you don't get as many ruling elders there as you do teaching elders, but it's much closer. So we do have this concept of parity, and all of our boards and commissions are about 50-50. But the voting crowd of commissioners at General Assembly is always, 3-to-1 or more teaching elders to ruling elders. This last year we had 25%, and that's the most it's been in a long time. When the PCA was formed, Roy Taylor, our retired clerk, he wrote that the PCA was formed largely through the efforts of ruling elders, and that's a fact. And there were more ruling elders than teaching elders at the first 2 General Assemblies, I think. But it's kind of gone down steadily since then. And there's a thought, it may or may not be so, that the ruling elders are a little more conservative and cautious than our teaching elders, some of whom are not tied to a church. They could be denominational employees or seminary professors or parachurch people. I sometimes call the PCA the parachurch in America because we have tons of parachurch connections and ministers who are in parachurch. There's just a bunch of them. And of course, Camden, here you are.
I don't know any of those.
No.
I do have a call from a local church. I serve in. I know
you do. But if I was mean, I'd make the joke that you're just a parachurch celebrity. That's not so. Not so. I'm not going to say it.
Thank you for that.
So there's this big imbalance, and if everything was going hunky dory, I don't know that anyone would worry about it. But there is a suspicion among the laity and smaller churches that if we could get more ruling elders to General Assembly, it would change things. I don't mind using this term because Kathy Keller, Tim Keller's wife, once used it. She talked about, the quality of her BS detector. And I think some people might say that ruling elders, because they're not professional Presbyterians and they have real jobs in the real world, they have a BS detector. In other words, they can see problems with things that maybe our clerical class can't.
Yeah.
And who spend a lot of time talking to each other, but maybe not understanding what the laity feel, because the ruling elders of a church are the pastors come and go, the ruling elders stay there. The session doesn't change much, and they are elected by the congregation, and in a sense they represent the congregation.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a strong congregational element in the PCA, and I always tell everybody to read the first few pages of our BCO, and you'll get that.
Sure.
So a little bit of a follow-up question here, Brad. Why is it that you think, anyway, what is your opinion, your take on why it is that the quote unquote clerical class, as you call them, tend to be more, as a whole, progressive as opposed to ruling elders?
Well, I mean, as we look at Presbyterian and Reformed history, I think we see that it's maybe it's the inaction of the laity and the ruling elders to blame to some extent. But look at the Presbyterian controversy. It wasn't ruling elders that led the PCUSA down the path to liberalism. I mean, the Auburn Affirmation was not signed by ruling elders, right. I don't think. And we should point out here, about 100 years after the fact, that the lectures or talks that Machen gave in 1921 or 2, which formed the basis for the great book, Christianity and Liberalism, were commissioned by a ruling elder association of one presbytery in the Northern Church. And so ruling elders were concerned, but I think it was the celebrities, the professional Presbyterians, the great men, the tall steeple pastors who led the PCUSA astray. I don't know as much about the PCUS, but I think it was probably the same thing. And presbyteries can become pastors' clubs in some way. And it's just good to have ruling elders there, because we all shepherd the church, and there are a lot more ruling elders than there are teaching elders, in any given denomination. So if there were to be any imbalance, you might actually say that there should be more ruling elders at every court of the church than just at the local level.
I think we really need to take seriously the office of ruling elder, the office of rule, and the function of it. If you take that seriously, what these men have been gifted by God to do, called by the church to do, is to govern, to rule the church under the headship of Christ and in accord with Christ's word and the government that he expresses in and through that word and all of those principles. So I find it rather peculiar to think that that we would all of a sudden think, well, these ruling elders, it's okay to have a handful of them around. Maybe they could be our treasurer or something. But we don't. Let's let the real work of the church fall upon those experts, the theological experts, the pastors. That's just a dangerous way to start thinking, and to all of a sudden think that if we want to increase ruling elders to come rightfully, if the church allows, if the polity of the PCA allows for any ordained elder in their terms, ruling or teaching elder to come and to participate, and it isn't unfair to encourage or to assist people to come, is it not? They've been ordained to this service, to this office. Shouldn't they not express the gifts and the opportunities they have? I know things are different because it's open to anyone, and that's maybe a question I would have for you, Brad. How might you respond to charges of stacking or unfairness? I should ask maybe a more pointed question. How then does more in the PCA entertain applications. And have you had any progressive city elders trying to use up your funds somehow? How does this work?
I would first say on the fairness issue and the stacking issue,
yeah,
the sports analogy would be to point at the scoreboard.
Yeah.
The numbers are what they are, and we're still we're still sort of outnumbered. I don't want to, that sounds negative, but we're just outnumbered at least 3-1.
And there's a whole other issue under the surface here. I don't want to take us down this road too much, but the matter of committee membership too. There's been organized efforts to stack, so to speak, or the membership in committees to help influence the trajectory of the General Assembly. That's another related issue.
Yeah, and we alluded to that earlier.
Yeah.
There have been organized efforts to make things happen. And like I told you, I mean, conservatives and confessionals talk to each other, but there's just not, I can put my hand on something and affirm that there's no similar organization on this other side of the PCA. But I would say that the first year that more in the PCA was around, we helped 5 people or something like that, and then we helped 15 or 20, and then we helped about 50 last year, most of whom were ruling elders. Those aren't huge numbers, but I think what we have done, we've made it safe to talk about this issue. And I think we motivated a lot more people than we helped get there. I think that was important. We're talking about it now, and that's helpful.
Yes.
But I'll say this: some guys on the other side, again, who are not liberals, they're a different kind of Presbyterian, or sometimes I say it's, this. I'm sure no one would like this on the other side, but I say it's sort of Presbyterians versus evangelicals. In Machen's day, it was Christians versus non-Christians, right? That's not what's going on here. It's 2 different ways of looking at the church and the mission. I don't even say there's 2 different ways of looking at the gospel. It's 2 different ways of looking at the church and her mission. But more in the PCA, if we have a small board that are all ruling elders, if we know someone. We're likely to just, if we know someone, we're going to fund them. If we know and trust that that they have a need and that they are concerned about the PCA. We don't have a litmus test. We've never told anyone how to vote. We don't have a questionnaire. If we don't know someone so well, we talk to them. But I tell people it's the same way. If your church was going to support a missionary, you would want a missionary that generally aligns with your I hate this term, philosophy of ministry, your priorities, and that's all that's in play here.
Yeah.
If you have a limited number of resources, you support the people who you think will do the best job and who have the greatest need. So I'm sure the average church is contacted by 50 different missionaries every year looking for support, but you don't support everyone. You support the people who agree with your assessment of the gospel, of the situation, of philosophy of ministry, missiology. That's another crazy word. It's just a priorities thing, and we also try to provide some fellowship for ruling elders. We'll have an event at General Assembly where they can get together. I mean, it's lonely. It's not only expensive and time-consuming and vacation burning to attend General Assembly, it's also confusing and lonely, and we try to help in that way too.
Yeah, that's a hidden side of things. It can be if you don't have a network of friends or people, and a lot of time the ministers do just through presbytery, and just by virtue of what we do, often have friends that we might have gone to seminary with, or friends that we've made over the course of years of involvement in General Assembly or presbytery. When you go to a General Assembly, it's in many ways kind of a reunion or a homecoming. But if you haven't been there much, or if you're not an animal of this type of environment, it can be alienating. You don't even know where to go or what to do, and can be really tough, especially in the evening when everyone's connecting with their alumni groups and whatever. affinity organizations and going out for dinner or whatnot, if you don't have somewhere to go, it does get really lonely. It can be really challenging. So we had a great time last time. I encourage people to look at the More in the PCA with the Presbycast episode that was hosted at the hospitality room. I had a great time there.
Yeah, I want to say three things very quickly. The involvement in Presbytery and General Assembly is very important, but it's not the most important thing that ruling elders do.
Sure.
Taking care of the local flock, it's, really that's harder than showing up at a meeting
Much more
and
difficult.
voting.
Mm-hmm.
I've always served with incredible ruling elders on my session, and I consider every one of them to be better guys than I am. So the most important work of the ruling elder is in the local church, and sometimes participating in the higher courts, shouldn't be kind of a cop out or something you do instead of serving in the local church, and that's the hardest and most important ministry of the ruling elder. I'll also say that there are fantastic ruling elders in the General Assembly. A lot of people like Mel Duncan and Howie Donahoe, who was the moderator a couple of years ago. We do alternate between ruling elder and teaching elder as our GA moderator.
Is that just a custom, or is that
it's baked in? No,
really.
The first moderator was Jack Williamson in 1973, and they even have the privilege to preach, or we say exhort, the following year. A lot of times they'll cede that, but not always. And I've heard some great addresses by ruling elders. So very capable men. There are a lot of guys on the Standing Judicial Commission that are admirable. And the debate at General Assembly, even though we're a third or a fourth of the commissioners, or a fifth of the commissioners, depending on the year, the debate in our overtures committee, our committees of commissioners, and the floor debate always features ruling elders. And a lot of times I can't tell whether it's a ruling elder or a teaching elder. They're very capable, committed, doctrinal, serious men, and that's something I want to say. And I said three things, but that's only two. But there are some wonderful. Well, I wanted to say my own. I did say three things. My own church has just had a great run of ruling elders and ministers who are real principled Presbyterians who taught us what we ought to do. Not all ruling elders have that. They may have more of a generic evangelical pastor, and they may not even know much about what they're supposed to be doing, and they don't have a motivation to participate in the higher courts. But I've had the best, and I admire the people I serve with, and the people all the pastors we've had at Oak Ridge have just been wonderful churchmen.
Yeah, we're thankful for that. Well, what's on tap for the 2022 General Assembly? We're going to Birmingham, Alabama. So I want to ask you, what's on tap, what's going on, and also, why did I have to go the route of an Airbnb?
Okay, well, you referred to lodging. COVID, and we'll start with your last question first. Of course, there were more than 2,100 commissioners at the last General Assembly. We have these things in cavernous halls, and we have these 20 by 30 foot video screens so that you can keep up with what's going on. If you go to the microphone, which most people shouldn't, including me, but I usually do, and you speak, there's about a 2-second delay, and it's an out-of-body, bizarre experience. Yeah. Some people can handle it. I can't handle it.
I think that's a signal of some psychotic tendency or something. If you're not bothered by that, then I think that might be the litmus test or the diagnostic for narcissism.
I've actually considered that. I believe you're right about that. So whatever else I'm guilty of, it's not that. But we have these massive halls and a lot of people. And so we had 2,100 people last year. Maybe that was because of pent-up demand from not having the General Assembly the year before. Maybe it was because of the controversial issues that we had before us. But anyway, everybody showed up. Well, and that was in St. Louis. It's in the middle of the country, but it's not, demographically in the middle of the PCA. This year is in Birmingham, which is where the PCA was formed, and probably I'm guessing here, but 70 or 80% of the membership of the PCA is within a 5-hour drive of Birmingham. We're going to have a lot of people there. I mean, There could be 2,500. I think probably more like 2,400. That's a lot of hotel rooms, and the hospitality industry there in Birmingham is not able to keep up. They don't have all their rooms open. Rooms that were reserved were pulled or became unavailable, and it's going to add to the stress. Hopefully it's not 95 degrees and 90% humidity, and I can see tempers flaring and tensions running high for any number of reasons in Birmingham. But I hope it's going to be a great time.
Sure.
We just had another case associated with Revoice decided, sort of decided against Revoice, but there won't be any votes at the General Assembly that have to do with any judicial cases involving Revoice,
right,
or Side B, celibate gay Christianity. But there are going to be more overtures. As you know, we had 2 overtures, 23 and 37, which would have tightened up some things in our BCO that might conceivably have made it more difficult for someone who identifies as same-sex attracted to serve as a pastor, or it would have required presbyteries to ask certain questions and kind of poke and prod in certain ways. Those overtures passed overwhelmingly at General Assembly, but they didn't pass the 2/3 of the presbyteries. They passed a majority, but not the 2/3 super majority. So there's a strong desire to get something like that in our Book of Church Order. So, those overtures are going to be sent back up. They're going to be tweaked slightly and sent back up. There's going to be new original ones that have the same intent. It's kind of weird because, in a way, these overtures don't change. The changes to the Constitution weren't that radical, but they were seen as a statement, which, when the laity hears about this SSA officer stuff, they understandably become concerned. And I think some people wanted to pass the overtures just as a sort of a statement or a symbol to the membership to say we're aware of this, we're doing something about it. That may or may not be a good way to do polity and structure your Book of Church Order, but it's understandable. So there'll be, I don't know, there could be a dozen different overtures involving the same issues as these 2 failed overtures. And there'll always be the review of presbytery records, which can be controversial as involves exceptions and that sort of thing.
right.
There'll be plenty to get excited about. Let's put it that way.
The review of presbytery records. Who would have thought? So exciting. We have that ends up becoming a theater for a clash among certain ideologies. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but whether the committee points out an exception or lets something go can certainly be a way in which the General Assembly acknowledges its approval or disapproval of how a presbytery is behaving, right?
Yeah. We had a big in 2017. There was a big controversy over images in the Second Commandment, and that came through RPR, and that was it. The result was surprising. It was positive, but I don't think anybody saw that one coming.
Yeah. And so this comes back full circle to what we alluded to earlier as well. The members of that RPR, the Review of Presbytery Records, now what they do isn't final. Their decisions come before the General Assembly, but this is why it's important to have proper representation at the General Assembly, that people come and they really make a difference. Membership on the committee is important, but also being present to hear out the arguments and also to properly vote on those matters is important too. Don't just hang out at the book table. As much as we're there at a book table and would like to talk to you, go to the sessions, participate, and be informed, and then be able to exercise your office. Maybe that should be some sort of a book that we could write, or we could do a documentary, Brad, called "Exercise Your Office."
Well, now more in the PCA helped pay for.
Oh, please tell us this. Yes,
a whole series of videos,
right,
featuring Fred Greco and Dom Aquila. You can just go on YouTube and search "More in the PCA." You'll find it. We're also on Vimeo. I think there's about 20 videos, and it's just sort of brief training videos for ruling elders. It's sort of an introduction to PCA polity, but also to the work of the ruling elder, and it's a wonderful resource. And we more in the PCA help fund that, and it could be, some of it's PCA specific, but any ruling elder might get something out of that. And let me address one other thing quickly. Sometimes people say, "Well, why are you worried about what another presbytery does in another part of the country, or what a church in some other presbytery does?" Well, it's because we're connectional. We really are. We're Presbyterian, and we're not Congregationalists. We're not de facto independent churches, although a few operate like that. It's not the only thing we should worry about, but we should worry about it. Especially today with social media. Our church members can hear about things that they would have never heard about otherwise, and we have to address those things. And we don't want to. And we really are connected. We care about all the sheep, not just the ones in our local area. It's easy to tune out the rest, but eventually, it all affects everyone. I mean, that's in the Northern Church and in the Southern Church. The old main line. I tell people, if you don't think you should be worried about what happens in other churches, drive around in the country and look at the tiny PCUSA churches, which here in the South they used to be PCUS churches. Then they merged to become the PCUSA in 1983, and they've died on the vine, almost all of them. Little church with 7 or 8 80-year-olds. And they share a pastor, and they have services every 2 weeks. They're all over, even East Tennessee, where I live, because of doctrine and because of polity and because somebody wasn't watching the store. We have dead little Presbyterian churches everywhere, and I don't want that to ever happen again. And I don't want it to happen with the PCA for sure. So that's why I'm concerned, and I can't help that.
No. Well, everyone needs to be checking out Presbycast online, on Twitter too. There's just an army of hilarity, maybe, but also information.
Well, I got to say, my partner Presbyterian, Presbycast was his idea. There would be no Presbycast without him.
He's tremendous.
Doesn't say much. What he does say can be interesting, but he's the heart and soul of Presbycast. So it's not all about me.
Of course not. No, we're thankful for his involvement, and I've enjoyed the couple times I've spoken on and been able to interact with him, at least through the airwaves. Looking forward to meeting him someday, and we encourage you to check it out. My whole Twitter feed is filled up with University of Michigan sports people, and the Presbycast army is basically just taken over. So I appreciate that. I have one final question for you, Brad, though, before we head out. Who is, or what is, the current reigning champion of chicken sandwiches?
Oh, well, that's a divisive issue. It's more, I'm sure we're probably more divided over that than over, than any issue in the PCA. We did this famous chicken sandwich show. A lot of people were grossed out by hearing us chew and eat.
Yeah, ASMR stuff. I have whatever the opposite of that I'm repulsed by this, by the chewing sounds.
Well, we'll probably never do that again. But I think the best chicken sandwich is the one you can get. So
fair enough.
If you don't, Bojangles,
Chick-fil-A, Zaxby's. No?
Yeah, Popeyes is good.
KFC just got their new thing.
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
But we're partial to Bojangles, but
okay.
That's a Southern thing, and we wish everyone had access.
Well,
to
this northerner,
to Bojangles.
This northerner needs to get some more exposure. So right now, we got a Chick-fil-A near us. I love it. Can't go wrong. Especially the breakfast biscuits, but and the chicken sandwich on a biscuit. But I know you did a Wendy's review in your car, not too recently.
Yeah, that was the honey butter, the hot honey butter biscuit. And it was good. It was good.
What has happened?
We have the occasional food review, so it's sort of lowbrow food, highbrow ecclesiology. That's what we're about.
And that's what I love about your program and the Twitter feed. I get everything from the ins and outs of Presbyterian polity, updates about cases, overtures at the General Assembly, as well as discussions about Taco Bell hot sauce and professional wrestling. So how can you go wrong? If these are the kinds of things you're interested in, you got to check out Presbycast, Jordel's Weekly, and Presbyterian, and all their rotating cast of characters. You'll appreciate it. So that's great. We'll have links to everything in the episode description. Check out Todd Pruitt's article, Reformation 21, as well. We'd love to carry on that conversation, follow up perhaps in weeks to come about some of these matters. And along with those links, I'll make sure to put Machen's article from The Guardian in there about the Presbyterian Constitutional Covenant Union and all sorts of great stuff. But yeah, and justice for Machen. Brad, it's really fun. It's great to do this with you. Thanks for coming on our program and allowing us to turn the tables a little bit. But it's been enjoyable, but also informative. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you.
You bet. We'll look for you online. Maybe we'll hop on a Twitter Space or some other live recordings. I often do live episodes, 9:30 in various evenings. And we're online at reformedforum.org, looking to do a few more live things once in a while. You can join our Discord server. Again, I don't like the name of that app, but it works really well for us. So if you would like to hop on over to that, we've got a little private community just to kind of keep things a little bit tamer. But if you're interested in that, send us a note at mail@reformedforum.org. Of course, you can donate at reformedforum.org/donate. But most of all, just encourage one another in the Lord and share these resources. Please spread this out, especially to ruling elders in the PCA, that more people can learn about the efforts in the denomination and the importance of participating and exercising your office. We do want to thank everybody for listening. We hope you join us again next time on Christ the Center.